The smell of fresh coffee lingered in the small-town diner, mixing with the faint sound of a jukebox playing an old soul record. It was the kind of place where truckers, teachers, and townsfolk came together, a patchwork of lives stitched under one roof. But that morning, peace shattered in the cruelest way. At the far end of the counter sat an elderly black woman, her silver curls tucked neatly beneath a scarf, her eyes tired yet kind. She had lived through decades of hardship and history, and her presence carried quiet dignity. She was simply there to enjoy her breakfast, grits, eggs, and black coffee, when Hate walked through the door. The man entered loud and reckless, his boots thudding against the linoleum floor like warning drums. His jaw clenched, his fists restless. He was younger, built strong, but his strength hid a weakness, his pride fed by prejudice. He noticed the old woman sitting quietly, and for reasons buried in his bitterness, he decided she was his target. "Move your stuff," he barked, shoving her purse on the counter. His voice carried the tone of entitlement, the sound of someone who believed the world owed him. The old woman didn't respond. She simply looked at him with steady eyes, eyes that had seen fire hoses turned on children, marches for freedom, and a lifetime of endurance. That silent strength enraged him. And then, in a moment that left the diner gasping, he slapped her across the face. The sound cracked louder than the jukebox. Forks clattered on plates. Conversations froze mid-word, and the old woman's glasses slipped off her face, falling to the floor. She didn't cry out. She didn't fight back. She simply closed her eyes, as though she had endured worse before. Viewers, before we go deeper into this powerful story, I invite you to pause and reflect. If this moment has already moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe to Kindness Universe. Your support helps us share more stories that remind the world of the power of courage and humanity. The diner sat in stunned silence, but no one moved. Fear kept them frozen. The bully smirked, enjoying the discomfort he had created. He thought he was untouchable, thought this woman was alone. But what he didn't know, what no one in that diner knew, was that this woman's son was no ordinary man. Her son was Marcus Reed, the head of Homeland Security, a man who had stared into the darkest threats facing his nation and never flinched. A man who had built his life's work on protecting those who could not protect themselves. And at that very moment, Marcus was not in Washington, D.C., not behind layers of security or at a conference table of generals. He was driving into his hometown, returning after years of duty, to surprise his mother with breakfast at her favorite diner. The door jingled open. The sunlight poured in behind him, and in walked a tall, commanding figure in a dark suit, his shoulders broad, his eyes sharp, his presence so powerful that the entire room seemed to shift. He saw his mother first, her face reddened, her glasses on the floor. For a split second his heart froze, but then his training, his discipline, his instinct, all ignited at once. "Mom," Marcus said, his voice low but burning. He rushed to her side, steadying her trembling hands. Then he turned slowly toward the man who had dared to strike her. The bully sneered. "What? You gonna do something about it?" He had no idea who stood before him. No idea that the man he taunted had entire task forces at his command, men and women who would move mountains at his word. But Marcus didn't need an army. He needed only his resolve. In 2 strides he stood face to face with the bully, his gaze unshakable. The diner was silent, breaths held, hearts pounding. Marcus's voice was calm, almost too calm, but every word dripped with authority. "You put your hand on the wrong woman," he said. The bully laughed nervously. "And who the hell are you supposed to be?" Marcus leaned in, his voice a quiet storm. "The man who makes sure people like you never get away with hurting the innocent." Then, without raising his hand, without shouting, Marcus did what he had been trained to do his entire life. He disarmed the bully, not with violence, but with control. He stepped into his space, seized his wrist in a tactical grip, and in seconds had the man pinned against the counter. The bully groaned, trapped, his earlier arrogance crumbling into fear. "You think strength is about picking on the weak?" Marcus asked, his voice echoing across the diner. "Strength is protecting them." The crowd watched, wide-eyed. A waitress whispered, "Who is this guy?" Marcus didn't answer. He released the man just enough to pull out his badge, flashing the unmistakable seal of Homeland Security. The entire diner gasped. Even the jukebox seemed to pause. The bully's face drained of color. "Homeland Security," he stammered. "That's right," Marcus said coldly. "And the woman you struck, she's my mother." The room erupted, not with noise, but with a collective shiver of realization. The man who thought he could humiliate an elderly woman had just discovered she was the mother of one of the most powerful men in the nation. The sheriff, who had been quietly eating pie in the corner, finally stood, his hat in his hands. "Mr. Reed," he said respectfully, "well, take it from here." Marcus looked at his mother, her hand still trembling in his. She gave him a small smile, a smile that said, "You don't need to fight my battles, but I'm proud you're here." The bully was dragged out of the diner, his bravado shattered, his future uncertain. But the lesson was clear: cruelty might find its moment, but justice will always answer. Marcus sat beside his mother, finally taking the seat he had meant to surprise her with in the first place. He picked up her glasses, cleaned them gently, and placed them back on her face. "Still like your eggs with too much salt," he teased softly, trying to lighten her mood. She chuckled, her voice warm. "You've been gone too long if you forgot that." For the first time that morning, the diner erupted in applause. Not for the badge, not for the title, but for the bond they had just witnessed. The unbreakable love between a mother and her son. And as Marcus looked at her, he thought of all the years she had carried him, protected him, believed in him. Now, it was his turn to protect her. Before we close this story, friends, I want to remind you, if you've been touched by this tale of courage, justice, and love, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe to Kindness Universe. Every interaction helps us spread stories that prove kindness and strength are the true powers of humanity. The sun rose higher outside, casting golden light through the diner windows. The day continued, plates of food served, laughter returning, and conversations flowing again. But no one who witnessed that morning would ever forget it. Because in a small-town diner, hate had tried to raise its hand. But love, backed by justice, answered louder. And the message was clear: the measure of a man is not in the power he holds, but in how he uses it to defend those who cannot fight for themselves.